Jenny. Paula Essam, who plays Sabine. Tyron Ricketts, who plays Alex and is also a co-producer, showrunner, and head writer. Jörg Winger, who is co-producer and showrunner and also head writer. We have to be democratic in our applause. And Chris Silber, co-producer, showrunner, and also head writer. And I'm also delighted to introduce Steve Bynum, our moderator. Steve Bynum is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Manager for Chicago Public Media, the parent company of WBEZ and the Chicago Sun-Times, among many other things. So without further ado, let's get started. And hello to our audience online.
All right. So first of all, it was a warm room, but there was fire on that stage, on that screen, and I get it. So I want everybody to just take a second to just kind of inhale, exhale. You know, this is amazing. First thing I want to say, Malick. You really hit me in my heart. There was a scene where at the barbecue, and it speaks to the reality of diaspora, of detachment and wandering. And there was a moment where I could tell something transitioned in you. You felt like you were home. To the question when the brothers first you in the car, they said, just, well, who are you? And then there was the scene with your partner where you were saying, you don't get it, but in a sense you were saying to her, you don't see me. And in that moment, it seemed like you felt seen and you felt like you belonged. And that is something that is a commonality amongst the diaspora. And I just want to applaud you and honor you for touching that core of blackness. And I thank you, brother. I appreciate you. Thank you. But I've got so many questions, and really around this theme of diaspora. And what I love is the fact that all of you, you came and you've seen so many people, you've visited with young people, different classes, different ethnicities and such, because you want to tell this human story. There's a Roman playwright from the 2nd century BC, Terence, who says, I am human. And I think that nothing human is alien to me. And I see that at the core of what you all have done. And so I guess for me to begin, I want to know what were some of the themes or aspects that just drew you to this project that is obviously so unusual. We'll talk about why and why it's so historic, but just initially, what drew you, what pulled you in?
I really love that quote that you just gave us. I myself come from a very classical theatrical background. I'm trained in Shakespeare and all these greats, the Greek tragedies, and the life of Samuel Meffire, the actual person, basically starts out like Greek tragedy. The day he's born, his father dies under mysterious, racially charged circumstances. And from there on out, you basically have the path of Icarus, the rise and the fall. And to get to portray something like that in a complex manner that was gifted to me by these great creators here, it was just a gift. But Something that always then comes as part of the answer to that question, which is why I like your thought so much. I am human, so nothing human is strange to me, or however you said it, or the great Roman man who said that. The story of Samuel Meffire is a three-dimensional story with redeeming qualities, but also with mistakes. And to get to tell the story of a man in a three-dimensional way that was never been done like that, with that type of focus on the black man in Germany, is history. Sadly, in 2023, it was history. It should have happened much sooner. We have many talented brothers and sisters who never got to do this. But this character is so rich. If you look in the further episodes, you get to witness me do many, many mistakes, and yeah, that was just a big one.
And this was an unusual project for a number of reasons. It's a kind of a curse and a blessing, where in Europe you have government support for arts to a degree that you don't have in the United States, and so the benefit is that, you know, there's a pool of resources, but then sometimes it can come with baggage. And so, as I understand it, this project being greenlit is rare, if having never happened at all. Tyron, if you could talk about how seminal this moment is for this work to be made.
Maybe I have to dive into how the story came to light and how long it took. So I used to be a rap musician before I became a filmmaker, and I was part of a rap group called Brothers Keepers. And we had a song called Adriano Letzte Warnung, Adriano the Last Warning, in which a bunch of black men and women stated that the German government is blind on the right eye, as we call it. So the German government was blind to the right-wing tendencies that grew stronger, especially in the East, but not only in the East. And so we did a school tour with this rap group, and before we could start the school tour, we had received death threats from Nazis, saying that if we would show up in the East, they would hang us from a tree. So
What year was this? I would need you to say it out loud.
This is 2001.
2001.
Yeah. So we needed security, and the real Samuel Meffire, he had just came, I don't want to spoil the whole thing, but he turned from a police officer, he became a criminal, so he just came out of jail, and he had a security company, which you also saw in episode 3. So he and his men protected us from the Nazis, and it was back then when he told me his story, and back then I thought it would be a great story to be on the screen, but we were told, and it was then in 2005, 2006, we had teamed up because I was on a detective show as an actor, and Jörg was the producer of the detective show. It was called Leipzig, Amtszeit, Super Leipzig, and we wanted to make a feature film out of it, but everybody in German film and television pretty much told us, yeah, it's a great story, but who wants to see a black lead? And so we couldn't make it in 2006. It wasn't financed. Nobody wanted to finance it. And it took, almost 20 years, and it took the tables to turn. It took times that are changing with Black Lives Matter, with the streaming services that have the whole world as an audience. And worldwide, there's like way less white people than people of color. So there was a reason, like a economical reason also. But it took almost 20 years for us to get the show done today. And I'm very happy that we got Disney Plus in Germany and Hulu in America on board, so we could actually make it happen.
I'm glad you said that. The reason why I believe so deeply in global citizenship is that is when we come to the reality that we are the global majority and not an ethnic minority. And that when we embrace globalism in the positive sense, then it creates a power, right, that resonates in its own momentum. Jörg, can you talk about some of the obstacles about getting this made, and especially given the history in Germany since actually reunification, not even going before that. One thing that struck me was that people tend to see the wall coming down and reunification as the end of something and the beginning of something else, but for black people in Germany, it's just a continuation. That's the thing that I got out of this, so that even when the wall came down, you were still being beaten, you were still being marginalized, you were still being oppressed, and you carried those marks, almost like a martyr. You know, you never got a chance to heal, right? So episode to episode, you get beat up, and then right when you feel like you're going to heal and have some normalcy, you're beaten again, and you carry those marks with you. That struck me. So in that regard, just when you think about the issue of race and also what gets greenlit and what doesn't, can you talk about some of those obstacles?
Yeah, I mean, as Tyron mentioned, in 2006, it was basically thinly veiled, racist remarks about how people don't want to see a black hero. Of course, times changed, and in the media industry, this show was greenlit by an American streamer, an American media conglomerate like Disney. We had 3 offers on the table when we went back to pitch the show 3 years ago. It was 2 streaming services and 1 public broadcaster in Germany. And we went for Disney because we felt that Disney had diversity in its DNA, and the people we talked to really felt like they really were on board with the vision that we had for the show, and they wanted to tell the story. And I think ZDF, which is a German broadcaster, and remember that in Germany, the public broadcasting sector is huge. It's 8 billion euros or dollars. It's a very powerful institution. But our last conversation with them was, yes, we're very interested in Sam as Saxon. We would like to make it, and we have a conference about diversity in 4 months from now, where we will discuss this idea. Whereas Disney said to us, we want to make this show now. So, it's...
So they tried to put it in a little bucket of DEI on the one side?
No, they would...
Not Disney, I meant on, when you said we're having a conference.
No, I think they would have probably, if we had the patience, they would have probably, in the end, have greenlit it, but it's just... It would have taken a lot more time, and also we would have actually have given, to be perfectly honest, less money. And we also knew that Disney Plus and Hulu would get the show, would get the story of Samuel Meffire out into the world. Yeah. So there's 200 million subscribers to Disney Plus and Hulu, and we wanted to tell this story, this Saxon story, which is a very local, at the same time very universal story, out into the world, and not just to German audiences.
Chris, you add to that and then give your general thoughts as well.
Yeah, I've been part of the journey since, for 10 years. 2013, Tyron and I have been friends for a very long time, over 20 years, and he invited me to become part of the journey of the story, which I'm very grateful for. And so I got to witness the struggle too. To me, I always believed in the story being told. It was personally important to me. That's what I can best talk about. For one, because I'm East German. I was raised in the country, and I witnessed those times, and I know what it's like to be chased around by neo-Nazis, because back then I was like a left-wing little punk rock kid. And so from a different perspective, and having a very diverse group of friends and having a Jewish background, I know about that. I know about hidden identities in Germany because of that particular background. And I felt, generally I feel when a story needs to be told, eventually it'll find a home. It may be frustrating to wait, but I never doubted that it would happen. And thank God, Tyron, and I'm always giving you credit for this, man, because Tyron never gave up on his belief that we would eventually make this show. He's been fighting for this for 20 years. And so that kept me going. But yeah, it's like watching the struggles, honestly, because of my particular background, I'm part of a minority, and so I have never been, it's never been not difficult for me to tell stories that I believe in, that are personally important to me, you know?
Thank you. Paul and Ivy, I want to spend a little time with you. I always, when you center Black womanhood in any story or any situation, there is a power and there is a strength and a dependability that resonates. At the barbecue, that scene and at other scenes where you're quoting poetry and you're singing, especially during that time period, that was during the Afrocentric movement, right? I was in college during that time, and so that was a time of, you know, really trying to understand the African roots in Western civilization, and great authors like Martin Bernal and Ivan Van Sertima and such, and pushing back against classicism, you know, in archaeology and history, and so your hair and actually there's, you could transport you to right now, right? Your look, your feel, your suave, your style. Can you, you know, talk about, you know, what was part of your motivation and process in this? Ivy, start with you.
To touch on the significance of Black womanhood, we had conversations about, for example, what Jenny's hair was supposed to look like. And what you a lot of times see is the same hairstyle on a character in a show. And I think for especially Black women that are very close to the culture, that's not quite accurate. So I thought it was amazing to see that nuance even playing into the show, you know, with Jenny having her corporate life, looking neat, and then you see her afro in the club or at home. I really love that aspect, and I think just, I don't know if you want to continue, because I really have to think.
Okay, I hope it works. What I really liked about the character of Sabine is that it shows an aspect of Black womanhood, especially as a mixed race woman, that is different to Jenny's. I think what the show is particularly good on is to not only show one Black character, but the variety of Black characters and how they behave and how they feel. And for Sabine in particular, she is, in the end, she has a Black brother and she has a Black mother, but after all, her best friend is white. So she also moves a lot in spaces where I think maybe sometimes, since she has this friend, she can kind of like, she kind of tries to forget or like not think too much about being a Black woman. But then when Jenny comes in, I think this is also a sort of revelation for her, what her identity could mean to her. And I think Jenny is like a major factor for her to discover that she wants to go out with her art. There's this scene in episode 3 where they're in Sabine's atelier, and Jenny's like, okay, I understand you don't want to put out your art into the world because you already feel so scrutinized and looked at and judged. And I think this is actually the first time that somebody had said that so like on point to Sabine, because maybe like her friend Yvonne has encouraged her, and then her brother has said like, oh, like, come on, just get it done, or her mother even, but nobody's ever actually seen her in this aspect of being seen in the way you are and having somebody understand you. I think that was very special to Sabine, and I think that's also something that I could connect to, because growing up, I, for example, mostly grew up with my with the white part of my family, of course also with my other Black part of the family, but I was mainly socialized in a white environment, going to, for example, like a white school. And when I started to have my first Black friends, which was really in my 20s, really, like it didn't happen before, I noticed that there were so many things that we had in common, but also things that I hadn't realized that like they were things that were related to my identity, and suddenly they're like, oh, like it's like this and this and this, and I'm like, oh my God, it all totally makes sense. And so I think that was really important for me in the show.
I want to talk about the intentional use of philosophy and poetry in the work. How many series do you see Kierkegaard being referenced, right? Not in this country, but in any event, where you start off talking about the birth pangs and how that harkens to you. Maybe talk about, Kafka's referenced as well, Malick. And you also spoke at the beginning about Icarus and Greek mythology and such. Maybe talk about how how poetry and philosophy and how it appeals to, our higher selves, and how that sort of comes down and becomes part of the narrative.
Well, I think one part which made it so organic and not some, I must say, conjured up idea, is that the real Samuel Meffire actually is a hindered author. He did poetry when he was younger, but his mother, who was very focused and strict, while also being, of course, traumatized by the murder of her loved husband, always said when he expressed his wishes to be an author that there were already enough communist thinkers and philosophers. So she always, I'm gonna say, suppressed that gift. But still, that is something that is so essential to it. And now that you bring it up, it makes me think of something. Like, on the way where we meet the character, it is about the birth of his son, right? And he uses poetry to express his need, I must say. And at the same time, he is also a suppressed author in himself. So when he passes on that book, he maybe tries to give his son the conduit to a different level of expression that he was taken away from.
Right.
Same as later on in the show when poetry comes back to him. It's very important, I believe. So I'm going to say that level of expression is something that is very inherent in the real Samuel Meffire's life. Also now, if you look at his book that he just published, also I think in the English-speaking world, or at least in English it's been published, a really lovely tale. It is also a tale of his life. It is not one-to-one. He fictionalizes stuff at points, but also to protect certain people's identities and whatnot. Because at his heart, he is an author. And that level of expression, juxtaposed to his physical dominance or presence, I must say, was something that we always toyed with. They already gave me the blueprint, but I still remember one scene very much towards the end of the show, where he receives but he receives a book, and I was like, oh, we have to use that poem. And then I basically terrorized Jörg in the morning, and his producer Naomi, who was great enough to always be open for ideas, and they gave me the shot to do it. And then later on in ADR, we really gave it homage again, where also a circle kind of closed, because there was this one very, very perfect poem also by Mayayim to cap up one of the storylines of the series. But I don't want to spoil it right now, which is why I'm so vague. I'm sorry.
No, that's all right. I love how you, in the series, you answer to this demand that you be identified and by your physicality, right? So, oh, you're a big guy. Oh, you can really play soccer. Oh, you can do that. But yet you would answer with higher consciousness, with intellectualism, with your full self, even though you were being looked at and addressed as a thing, right? To be scorned or ridiculed or feared or exoticized or whatever. And the same for your characters, right? So that transitions me to a bigger conversation about blackness, Africanness, and Germanness, for lack of a better term. Growing up in the United States, I always heard about the Jewish Holocaust and that tragedy. Little known was that the first genocide of the 20th century was in Namibia, when Germans occupied Namibia for 30 years almost, and there was a genocide of the Herero tribe and the Nama tribe. 100,000 Herero were killed. 80% of that tribe was wiped off the face of the earth. That history, I don't think, is commonly taught in German schools. And so where do you pull your sense of self and your narrative? Because there are plenty of slave narratives for African Americans here, even though a small percentage of Africans actually came to the continental United States. The overwhelming majority went to the Caribbean, South America, North Africa, and other places. So where do you draw on your source, your history, your narrative, your place within the German paradigm being black people?
Can I answer that?
Tyron, please.
There's a saying, until the lions learn to write, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter.
Wow.
So that goes for Germany, but it goes for the world in general. I mean, we here in America, because we're in America right now, we learned that America was discovered by Columbus. How can he discover a continent where people lived before? So that shows the Eurocentric point of view from which we used to tell the world for the last 500 years. Usually the view of the white male. Now times change. I think the way we communicate changes. You know, the world is, we used to communicate in a pyramid, only the powerful, they said this is the truth, we all had to believe it. Nowadays, through digitalization, we communicate in networks. So people that didn't used to have a voice now have a voice. And I think we as storytellers, we need to take advantage of that change. So hence, we need to tell our own stories. And there's a Black German story. You know, Maya Yim, she was part of the Black German story. What you said about Namibia, you know, that's part of a Black German story. And yeah, we just need to start telling our own stories, and we just need to be brave and like add an extra perspective to the angle we used to look at the world from just only a white point of view. And that's just, it's gonna be more and more, because like I said in the beginning, there's way more people of color in the world than there's black people, than there's white people. So why will we only look at the world from one perspective? And we just have to own that.
Paula?
I kind of want to add something on that because I think totally agree with Tyron that we have to tell our own stories and the narrative has to be changed. But I think it's not only about making it known, but it's also about history creating confidence and feeling in people. I personally, I really like history. Like I watched a bunch of historical dramas. I really like books related to history, and in a way I was always looking for myself in the history of Germany because I am a German citizen, and I was looking for myself and I couldn't find myself in the mainstream media, and it was always very disappointed, and I was wondering, do I even belong here if there has not been a precedent of me being here? And so I think depicting diversity and depicting it's not even diversity, it's the reality of what was instead of the reality of the majority. I think that is really important to giving people identity and also to giving people confidence, because I think, how do you say, not idols, like Vorbilder, like something that has been done before. Role models are so important. Like, for example, when you have never seen anybody do it before, you always feel like there's a huge pressure if you have to do it, if you have to be the first person. And if you see that black people have lived in Germany and have gotten along in Germany and have gone their way in Germany for 200 years or even more, because that's what it is, but it's not been told, then I think that can be very powerful, and that can also be uplifting and empowering. And I think that's why it's important to tell those stories, and because I think they can actually change something in people.
Just so that we speak that truth and we hold up and elevate our ancestors, Can the four of you just briefly tell me the background of your family and how you came to be in Germany?
So my mom's German and my dad's from Cameroon. And as a lot of you might know, like Cameroon has been a German colony. So I think they had like a special scholarship program, and my dad came on a scholarship to Germany in the 90s, and yes, has been living in Germany ever since.
Tyron?
In my case, I was born in Austria, so my mom's Austrian. My grandparents, my grandmother was from Austria, my grandfather was from Germany. They were actually both like part of Nazi Germany, actively. And my dad's from Jamaica, so I don't know.
When did he come to Germany?
He never came to Germany. Like my parents met in London, and then when I was on the way, they moved back to Austria, and then I moved to Germany when I was 6. But Jamaica also, like a couple of generations down, he was brought there. His ancestors were brought there, slaves from West Africa.
So both of my parents are from Ghana, so I don't have German roots. And my parents both came in the 80s, met in Germany. Oh. And yeah, so I think apart from going to school in Germany and having German friends or non-white German friends, there was always the Ghanaian community I was part of. So even within living in Germany, especially because there weren't so many black people in the 90s and the early 2000s, Ghanaians in Berlin would basically have, their communities. So I would grow up in that as well as growing up in regular German schools.
Well, my mother's German, white German woman, and my father's from the Ivory Coast, and he also came here on a scholarship. But I want to circle back to a question that you gave us earlier concerning where we get or derive our identity from, concerning our blackness or even Germanness. I loved what Tyron and Paula said, but it was concerning also a broader scope. I'm going to be very direct here. I was lucky enough, in comparison to maybe Sam or other people who are mixed raced, that my mother always had a distinct interest in Africa itself, and always made sure that even after my father left us, that I be in touch with my African side. And I had some uncles who were also close by, who always kept me sort of in contact with Africa. But a very eye-opening moment for me also as an artist, where I feel like I made like leaps and leaps in my level of artistry and expression, was when I went to the Ivory Coast in 2018 to come in contact with my roots and my little brother, because I basically always had this feeling or a certain resentment or disappointment, because we're in America right now, I'm going to bring it up, which I sometimes see in an Afro-American dialogue concerning the slave trade or the Mafa, concerning a feeling of being left behind by the African continent or whatnot. And I had that feeling myself, given that my father left us when I was young, and then also because that family my father's from is not particularly poor, quite the contrary. They never really invited me to come over, and then there was that level of resentment there. But then when I saw my baby brother, I knew that that was the person who I could then use as an anchor, because there's no resentment there, because in the, I'm gonna say, blood hierarchy, I'm above him, and I want to meet him. And then I got in contact with Africa, which I feel is something that would very much so benefit the Afro-American community, who of course have that pain of that gap of identity, which then always gets filled by the outside with whatever bullshit they were trying to feed us over here, you see? And so I feel that real sense of Africanness is something I got in contact with by being in contact with Africa throughout my whole life, but then really like understanding that there was always a certain gap and a crack, I'm gonna say, in the glass. And we need to fill that crack in the glass, I feel, in transatlantic Afro-diaspora relations as well.
You all, thank you for that. Thank you. You all have been on a tour of the United States. The series has been out for a few months, but you felt the need to come here. Maybe talk a little bit about why you felt that need and what you've experienced and what you hope comes from this, from the coming home.
I mean, it's just nice to, if you make something that you like, I think it's nice to show it around and like to see how people react to it. And certainly people here, they have a different perspective than the German audience. So it's been nice. We've been to Davidson College in North Carolina. We're here today, we're in New York tomorrow, and we see like different audiences. You know, this audience here today is way different than this morning. We were at the university here, you know, it's like mainly like people of color, younger people. I'm interested to hear your guys' opinion about the show too. And yeah, I think, you know, the reason we did it is because we also wanted to start a conversation. You know, as a storyteller, you put a story out because you want people to start thinking about how they saw the world before and maybe they see it different afterwards. And just to get different perspectives from different, you know, folks and walks, that's just super interesting. And hopefully it's gonna spark something here. You know, if you like it, you tell your friends, and then more people are gonna watch it on Hulu. So that's gonna be.
I just watched 2 episodes, so you don't have to worry about that.
Sorry.
Please, Ivy.
I also think it's good to compare notes, if I want to call it that, especially when it comes to the African or Black diaspora, because I think we do experience everything we experience kind of encapsulated in the places we grow up, and I think especially because the Black American perspective is quite known in the world. I think it's actually good to, have an exchange on that too. You know?
And there's privilege in that, even though, you know, generally we consider ourselves marginalized people. Our narrative, our transatlantic narrative, is the predominant narrative, and pushes out all other narratives. And so I'm just glad that in your way you've been able to decolonize our own narratives. So I thank you for that.
Even though we were inspired, I mean, in my case, I was heavily inspired by African American narrative. When rap music came into my life, it saved my life. I was a little black kid in Germany. If I switched on the TV, there weren't any black people. Like none, zero, nothing. You know, and then when rap music came, it showed me that, you know, I saw other black people that had found a voice, had found a way to express themselves, and it strongly inspired me to go start on my path.
We're in the 50th anniversary of hip hop music, and actually it's interesting because one of my best friends, he did a study abroad in 1984, African American, spent the year in Germany, went to East and West, made friends general in both sides. But back then in the United States, it was the first time where black culture was breaking through to the mainstream. You know, Michael Jackson, Prince, Lionel Richie, movies, all of that. And obviously that would have sort of eked its way to Germany in that regard. So the fact that you were probably listening to those late 80s, early 90s hip hop artists and how that impacted you just speaks to the power of culture and diaspora. And so I guess I want to just take this moment, so for people in the audience who have any questions, please, anyone?
I just have one.
Sure.
It's really interesting for a reason. It's a Wendegeschichte, and there are lots of them on German TV and in the movies. And I just wonder where you guys that made it and wrote it think that it fits within that particular genre.
Well, I would say that it's the first time we're showing literally the when and the fall of the wall from the perspective of a black German. And, you know, usually the story is very jubilant, and you know, we see, you know, a big sea of German flags, and everybody wants to be free and happy, and and get rid of the shackles of communism, etc., and wants to basically buy a Mercedes. But here we see that in that night, and we know this from documentary film material that we've screened, that underneath, when you dive into those masses of people who were celebrating, there were quite a few neo-Nazis among them, and they were thinking, this is our time has come. Germany will be reunified. There's going to be a rebirth of nationalism, and they thought of it as white nationalism, and they started chasing, people they didn't like, and that did not stop at black people. That was also gay people and everybody that didn't fit their idea of Germany. So I think for us, it's a fictionalized scene that Sam was there on that night and ready to basically stop the demonstrations. But he's encountering these Nazis who he thinks are going to attack him, but then they don't, because all they see is the uniform. So the uniform protects him from that attack. And one thing is, he realizes that the uniform can be very powerful, because it gives people respect, and for the wrong reasons maybe. And also he sees that there's a real danger, and that danger grew. I mean, in our official history, we don't talk much about the years after the wall came down, when the communist order, the communist police was gone, and the new order, the West German or the unified police, was non-existent, and there was a power vacuum that was filled by neo-Nazis in small towns, especially, as Chris pointed out earlier today, also some of it in big cities. But really the countryside was, all of a sudden, the neo-Nazis were playing police, and then they started hunting down people, known as the baseball years. But it was really on the verge of a civil war, and that was a very dangerous time for anyone who didn't fit their idea of Germany.
A quick thing I'd like to add is, being from East Germany, you're right in saying it's a genre. There's a Wende genre. I actually contributed it with working on Good Berlin, but the Wende genre never really addressed what you already touched on, which is that throughout 40 years of East Germany, a massive aspect of German reality was completely swept under the rug, which was the existence of racism, of anti-Semitism. In East Germany, we acted like that country was the good side of they were on the good side of history. All of a sudden, everybody was basically washed clean of any Nazi past. And that created, for those of us who were on the marginalized side, created this fear that we saw things brooding under the cover. Because, when you hide something, it doesn't mean that it's going away. It's just sort of festering, And so for all of us, as Jörg has touched upon, when the nights that were nights of joy, as seen as that in the world, for many of us were nights of fear. And nights of great concern. And I don't think I've ever seen that in the Wende genre. So in that sense, we kind of felt we were doing something new and had the freedom to not really think much about how we fit in.
Anyone else? Well, just artistically, if I can nerd out a little bit. I don't know whether this is intentional or not, this is how it landed with me. It felt like the first part of the film had sort of an Italian neorealism to it. You had sort of, it felt darker and more despairing, and there was need and neglect. Like the films of De Sica and Rossellini and Fellini and others, but then it transitioned to almost this postmodern Guy Ritchie, Quentin Tarantino kind of feel. So I don't know if that was intentional or if it's just the flow of going from east to west and to unification. I don't know, but maybe talk a little bit about just the construction and the mixing of genres.
Well, it's exactly what you're saying. It's basically he wakes up, and we wake up in episode 3 in a new country. What's often not talked about. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the German need for safety and security, etc. And I think it comes from Germany has been 5 different countries in 100 years. America has had the same constitution, the same political system, the same currency, the same everything for 300 years. In Germany, we had monarchy. failed democracy, dictatorship, fascism, communism, another democracy, reunification, and that's a lot. And that was an extremely upsetting change, good and bad, in many ways. And that's what we wanted to reflect in the visualization of when he goes to a disco, he says he's never been to a disco, but nobody, and that's specifically true for Samuel Meffire, but it's also generally true. People from the GDR were all of a sudden waking up in a world that they had never seen because they were not allowed to travel.
It's like sensory overload.
Yeah.
Right. I guess I'll just wrap with this then. What is Germany?
A lot of history.
I'm gonna answer in the context of the show, because in my opinion, or in fact, we are telling a story of at least two minorities: the Black German people, but also the GDR people. And the problem we have, I think, internationally, is that every empire only admits to one shame.
If so.
If so, yeah. And in Germany, it is, of course, the Shoah and what happened with the anti-Semitism during the Third Reich. And two other very, very pus-filled wounds we need to clean out are our failed reunification. I studied in Leipzig. Whenever I wanted to rent a place, I was talking to some guy from Bavaria or Hamburg or whatever, because they basically disowned the place. Everybody came in, bought everything. Everybody who was a boss or was a business owner was all of a sudden displaced by some guy from the West who he had to buckle down to all of a sudden. And that resentment is still a problem, and it's very much so rising today. And the other thing is, of course, what you touched on, which I'm very glad and thankful for, our colonial past, which was a bit shorter than the one of France, England, and whatnot, but we did the same crimes. And yeah, these things will need to be touched upon. But still, in the reality of today, even though there were great interventions, of course, with colonialism to Africa's potential, there are few places in the world, whenever I talk about this with other black brothers and sisters, which are actually in totality offer more opportunity for black people than Germany. If you think about the job side, all of us basically described that there were never really jobs for us compared to here. But then we have a much different socio-economic webbing of school systems, justice system, healthcare systems, and whatnot. So it is a place worth defending, but it has its issues. And I feel like these two wounds in today's time of our left progressive bubble, when we sit here in this lovely place at Goethe-Institut, versus a geopolitical swing towards nationalism and fascism. These two wounds are two things, given that we are at Goethe-Institut, Germany really needs to look at. There has to be some sort of atonement for the failed reunification and our colonial past.
I mean, I do think it's a very tricky question to answer.
Why I asked it.
Yeah, but now that Jörg said, I never thought about it like that, that Germany in the past 100 years had so many different system changes. And I think Germany generally is a place that is scared of change because of that trauma probably too. But we do still need to realize that if we do control the change, and it's not like, forced on us, there is actually good that can come out of it. And that is the hope for Germany as a whole, may it be politically or in media and entertainment. I think it really concerns many different fields in Germany where people are allowed to be brave instead of just feeling scared of change because we know that in the past it hasn't been easy. Yeah.
Well, to me, Germany, first of all, is my home, you know, and it feels like my home. I think what's a bit problematic is that there's a discrepancy between how Germany really is and how Germany
Thinks it is.
thinks it is, or the story that Germany tells about itself. Because right now there's like 25% of all the people that live in Germany have migrant backgrounds. But Germany never saw itself as an immigration country, even though it has been an immigration country since, you know, the 60s. But we just called the people that came Gastarbeiter, which means guest workers, which implied that they need to leave after they worked. And they didn't leave, you know, they're still there. So now we're talking 25% people have migration background. The younger the group is you look at, the bigger the percentage gets. So I think Germany needs to, for its own sake, needs to change the story that it tells about itself. And because if we have a story that includes all, eventually I think it's going to be nicer for everybody that lives there.
Yeah, it's a tricky question. You know, I was about to say, you know, it's home, certainly for me, in a way. It's also, I guess, language, which is, somebody said in North Carolina yesterday, language is the door to culture. But I also, you know, I live in Berlin, and Berlin is transitioning, for example, as the German capital, into a city that is becoming an English language city, where, you know, people, there's a lot of people who don't speak German anymore, and who feel that Berlin is their home. So maybe language is also not necessarily the answer to what is Germany. Yeah, I think, you know, it's such a difficult question, but I think there's some things I would say, just, you know, to make this very short, or shorter than I would make it. I think that what we did with the Shoah is amazing. I think it can really serve as a role model for all the other topics that we need to tackle. You know, the topics that Malick, and what makes me proud. I mean, there's many things to feel guilty about and terrible about, also including my own family history. But I think, you know, I would like to start with, I get incredible pride of how we dealt with the Shoah, and I would like Germany to deal with all the other issues in a similar way.
Paula?
What is Germany? It's a country in the middle of Europe. That I know. Has a bunch of neighbors that I know. Has a flag, red, gold, black, that I know. It's the place where I have grown up with until I was 17, that I know. I went to elementary school. I drank milk in the breaks. I went on to a gymnasium. I had my LKs. I did my Abitur. That I know. But at some point, I felt like I couldn't go on anymore and really wanted to leave. That I also know. And now I'm back. Because I do believe that Germany, after all, is a country of possibilities. And it's the possibilities and how we try to make them happen is what can make a difference in the future. That I truly believe. It's a country where we can make a show like Sam is Saxon, and we can make it a success with public money. But then at the same time, they can still stop to give public money to other shows, that I also know. I do hope that in the future, more shows like this will be made, because I think more shows like this will be able to make a change. And I don't know what will happen in the future with the AFD on the rise, because right now, every second day, an asylum seeker's home is under attack. So what will we see? The rise or the demise? I hope that Germany will be the country that we want to live in, and I hope we can all be a part of making it the country that we want to live in, that I know. If it's going to work out, I don't know.
Well, to me, for one, historically, Germany is a conglomerate of different principalities and territories sort of desperately struggling to become a nation. And I believe in some ways we still see the results of that. I don't know if that's ever going to be finished. There's a challenge in that. There's also a chance in that for all of us who are sitting here, I believe, because Germany is constantly sort of still looking for itself as a nation as much as Germans are branded outside. For me personally, Germany is the place where several of my people were put through very terrible times and killed for who they were and also what they believed in and for standing up for what they believed in. But it's also the place that has faced those aspects of its history. It's not a country that gives itself an easy time. And I really appreciate it about Germany. It's a place where I can take my Black American wife to Buchenwald, where they killed some of my people, and we can talk about that history and we can see it in front of us. That gives me hope, just as Jörg said, that we can tackle the other parts of our history, the less covered ones. And it is also the place that my son, Afro-German, a biracial kid mostly raised in America, just chose to move back to, because he believes in the future and in the life of that country, which deeply touches me. It is a country where some of the greatest ideas and the most beautiful thoughts that I know have been formulated, and I would not be who I am, and I would not be the artist I am without that. So I'm deeply grateful, and I believe the people who sit here, and many people like the people who sit here, will contribute to what my hope is for Germany, that it will be a nation that will continue to actually give light to the world.
Malick, Ivy, Tyron, Jörg, Paula, Chris, thank you all. This work has started ripples, and we're not done yet. Amazing. Thank you.